Welcome to our complimentary webinar, which is brought to you today in partnership with Nuance Communications, and it's entitled Messaging, the New Paradigm. Over the next 60 minutes or so, with the help of today's speakers, Dan Miller, Lead Analyst and Founder, Opus Research, and Josephine Fourage, Senior Principal Solutions Marketing Manager, Nuance Communications. We hope you'll be asking lots of questions, reflecting on your approach to best practice, as well as taking some ideas back to your respective organisations. There will be a Q&A at the end of the session. I'm Fiona Keogh, CEO of Auscontact and your moderator for today. While we're waiting for everyone to join us, let's use the time wisely to quickly run through some housekeeping, which will enable you to interact with us to maximise the benefit. And as you know, then there's no need to take too many notes because we'll be providing you with the slides and recording of the webinar. To interact with us, please click the Q&A on the control panel and then type your questions. You can ask questions or make comments for either Dan or Josephine or myself from time to time. Just remember, we're going to have a full Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so please type your questions during the webinar so you don't forget to ask them. I know that many of you are familiar with asking questions, but let's try out the questions pane on the control panel now, just in case. And the question for today to practice with is, have you enacted your BCP in response to the COVID-19 pandemic? I think this is very topical globally. Josephine and Dan, are you seeing anything at the moment? Especially in the US where you're located?
That's a curveball, of course.
A rhetorical question, Dan, perhaps.
Exactly.
What about you, Josephine?
Well, yeah. Yeah, sure. But I think we are all in it together. So, and we all deal with it together in those challenging times. Which, by the way, I really appreciate that everybody takes the time to be here. You, Fiona, you, Dan, and all the attendees, right, to join us for this webinar and to make time for that.
Fantastic.
I second that.
Yeah, we're not seeing so many responses to BCPs being enacted, and perhaps the BCP is that you don't tell people you've enacted the BCP.
Wow.
I'm not sure. So anyway, oh, Sean, thank you. No, but we're testing it. Well done. You do absolutely need to test your BCP before you go full implementation. Brilliant. Okay, so let's move along because I know that Dan and Josephine have got lots to share with us. If you're listening through your headphones or speakers and experience any issues with your internet connection, and if I could put my teeth in, it'd be even better. Please note that on the control panel, you can click to raise your hand and someone from the Auscontact team will rush to your aid. Failing that, you can actually switch to the good old telephone. You'll need to go back to the email where the link was sent to get the toll-free number and all the other information to rejoin us. So let me just tell you a little bit about Josephine and Dan. I know you've got the email, but let's just remind you. Josephine is the Senior Principal Solutions Marketing Manager at Nuance. She focuses on automated and human-assisted engagement in digital channels. Josephine brings more than 10 years of experience in sales and marketing for technology-related businesses in Germany and the US. Her past expertise ranges from selling and configuring Apple computers, oh, I want you at my home, Josephine, to defining the market and messaging for a security software for on-premise data centers and services offered through the cloud. And Dan Miller is the lead analyst and founder at Opus Research. Dan founded Opus Research in 1986 and helped define conversational commerce through consulting engagements and by authoring scores of reports, advisories and newsletters addressing business opportunities that reside where automated speech and natural language processing leverages web services, mobility and enterprise software. So I think we're in really good company today. So with that, I'm really pleased to welcome both Jan and Josephine, who are sitting in the US, and it's over to you, Josephine.
Thank you so much, Fiona. Thanks for the introduction and welcome everyone. During today's webinar, we want to talk a little bit more about messaging, the different types of messaging, what you can, the value of it, the different channels that you can experience, and what it means from an operational efficiency perspective. And when we talk about messaging, we include different types of it, really. It's the old school SMS that has been around for years, really. But also new versions like your branded app maybe, or Apple Business Chat, or messaging apps like Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, and all the others out there. But before I really dive into the details, Dan, I would like to hear your opinion about importance of messaging, what you see in the market, and what it means for business to consumer communication.
Absolutely. Thank you. And I want to say thanks to everybody for attending. I know there's no place I'd rather be right now. We're all sort of hunkered down, you know, in place here in New York City, in my case. And the thing you realize, and we were talking about this before this panel began, is a lot of us are not speaking as much as we used to because we are engaged in conversations over messaging platforms. Hold on one sec. Man, I sounded so good prior to this. But and the simple reason is, and putting it in the context of business to customer communications, is we're really seeing that conversations and messaging is a subset of that, and a very important subset, is turning out to be the ultimate customer experience. You hear about journeys, you hear about, you know, digital communications, but all of these become part of a family of conversations that ideally take place between individuals and the brands they want to carry out business with. It starts out with a contact, often a search and that sort of thing, but it's an ongoing conversation, and it's a conversation that more and more can take place anywhere, over any device, at the time that's really under the control of the individual. And what's neat, because it lends itself to a messaging model rather than a contemporaneous conversation. So we're getting used to having asynchronous communications, where there's a succession of moments where we might reach out to communicate contemporaneously, or there might be moments where we're inspired to sort of type something in to send. So we've really seen a change in, quote, the paradigm for how we communicate with one another. And it's totally changed our expectations for, hey, when somebody will get back, when a business might respond. You know, we've all sort of changed our standards. When those moments take place, as any contact center manager knows, increasingly they're very purpose driven. And you know, messaging platforms lend themselves to messages that are originated at a point in time and driven by a specific purpose. And that, in the context of contact centers, in the context of omni-channel customer support, increasingly in marketing, it means that you want to put resources into place either to inform the live agents that are responding, or increasingly virtual agents or automated entities, the ability to rapidly recognize what an individual is saying. And we're seeing a lot of investment adjacent to the investment in various messaging channels into elements of artificial intelligence, natural language understanding, and machine learning that help brands better and more quickly understand and recognize, you know, what the purpose of a contact, the purpose of a message, and how to complete it. Now, these, as I mentioned, are taking place multimodal, which means it's through multiple devices. It can use voice or text. It can be over the phone. Increasingly, we've been seeing it as smart speakers, but whatever is indeed convenient to the individual. And I think we're ready for the next slide. But more and more, where these messaging or these conversations are originating and taking place is over a smartphone. And it's not, shouldn't be news to anybody here that smartphones are the constant companion for about 3.5 billion people of the 5 billion people on Earth. And it doesn't just support messaging, although, quote, messaging platforms, unquote, support a variety of activities. But they do define that conversational engagement that people are having with the brands they want to do business with. And it often starts with search, then it turns to a consultation with a social network or social graph. That can take place via text, via these sorts of platforms, conferencing, collaboration, and voice. So messaging is part of that, but a very, very important part. And we're seeing increasing volume of messaging. But the smartphones themselves just have become the most important tool that individuals have for carrying out both their online and offline activity. It's where their virtual wallets are, and increasingly, as people grow more comfortable with the fact that automated assistants or agents understand or even nudge that, turn into nudge or your own personal agent, we'll see more and more activity that can be, silent messaging based, can be voice based, where the phone just increases in importance, and it has become the foundation for what is technically called rich forms of messaging, meaning that messaging, we think, we'd always thought text. Josephine mentioned, hey, it started with SMS and telco offered messaging platforms. But increasingly, we're sharing videos, we're sharing voice files. It's a very, well, we're filling out forms, we're making payments. There's all sorts of activities that start with that messaging platform. Next slide, please. Some stats here. The phone does support all those things that I was talking about, but messaging is one of its fundamental purposes. As you look at those, Josephine rattled off some of the proprietary messaging platforms, the WhatsApp, the WeChat, all the others, Facebook Messenger. Each one of them is approaching 2 billion active users. And by active used to sort of mean, hey, they're active. We had service providers would say, hey, I have 5 billion active users, and it meant maybe they used it once a week or something like that. But we're finding that users of their smartphones and their messaging platforms originate something on the order of 5 trillion texts each year, and that equates to over 15 million each minute. And I don't know, to me, that sort of blows my mind. I came out of the phone business, and people used to point out, well, everybody's got a phone, it's ubiquitous, but it's off hook for, big phone users on the order of an hour a day. We're using our smartphones, 24/7 is an exaggeration, but during our waking hours, on impulse, we will originate messages, and the volume is just staggering, and it continues to grow. But so does voice, and we all know there's balance taking place. But it just is a testimony to the power of messaging, because they all fall into that category of messaging. Next. So, and the neat thing about the text one, and this headline is not original. I remember when one of the major messaging platforms introduced the use of messaging for communication, B2C communications, and vice versa. They said, oh, the great thing is you have a canonical record of these conversations, that they're asynchronous and they're comprised of those moments, but they're reviewable and they're ingestible by analytic engines, and that's how you have these asynchronous conversations. They're they're stored. The customer expects them to be permanent or a matter of permanent record. The directory that's associated with the messaging platform can have chatbots, it can have live agents in a contact center, it can have social peers and family members. And what's kind of neat is you look at the strains that go through the messaging platforms. The objective is to culminate in a completion of a task. These, as I said, they are purpose driven. And those purposes, you know, it may take time, but, you know, they get resolved or they get forgotten. But another thing that I want to bring up in this context is when you're using a proprietary messaging platform or even SMS, you're kind of authenticated because, you know, having the device you have, having your smartphone, having your phone number, you are basically, you know, you've you know, used your face or finger or some numerical pattern to activate that phone, and you've assured, you know, to some degree of certainty that it is you that is using it. When you've accepted a bot or an agent that works for a brand to be in your directory, you know, that's permission in the greatest sense of the word. And it promotes trust the next time you want to go and message with that thing, entity, person. And it's the basis for trusted communications. And that's an important thing to keep in mind as you think about the value of conversational commerce carried over messaging platforms. And I think that's, oh, next slide, please. Which makes it a win-win for both the brands and customers. As we discussed, it overcomes time and distance, you know, 24/7, puts the brand presence in each of the customer's directory. And that in turn contributes to the lifetime value of the customer because, you know, there's a permanent bond there supporting these asynchronous communications. And then when immediate action is a must, when you hit that moment where you want to have something done, it makes authentication more effortless. There's a history, that canonical history that can contribute to quick recognition of the past interactions, past task completed, and sort of an indication of your future intent, and it speeds up completion of the next task. So that's why we're very excited about the power of messaging and messaging platforms as time progresses.
Yeah, I wonder, Dan, how many people, because you talked about like, right, how many moments we have with our smartphone, how many people in this webinar touched their smartphone or even maybe received a message well since we started. Maybe next time we should have that as a final question, like who's the winner, who sent the most?
We wouldn't find it too flattering. I mean, we all know, you know, why people have their smartphones here all the time, and as a person with the attention span of a gnat, yeah, it's worth asking.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much. I always appreciate your insights, and I absolutely agree, right? Messaging is so important, and it's such a great opportunity going forward. And as you said, the big advantage is if you utilize messaging, you're in your customer's phone, right, from an organizational perspective. So that's huge. That's really what we, what organizations want, right? They want to be seen. They want to be able to connect with their customers. And in general, so with all the changes that are happening from a messaging perspective, the capabilities that mobile platform vendors put out there, it's easier than ever to find those messaging capabilities to be discovered by the consumer that you now can message as well. So latest enhancement make it really better to invite users to message instead of letting them call in. Really, it helps with call deflection. And that's the game changer about messaging right now. That's where all those mobile platform vendors, all those messaging app vendors help the customer to engage with the brand or with the organization easier and to grow the usage of messaging. Then availability is a big plus. Everybody uses messaging nowadays. I don't know anyone who's never sent a text message in some way or another, and it's everywhere, right? With the smartphone, everybody has it. It's everybody knows how to use it, and there's one, if not many, messaging apps on all of these phones. But even if it's not a smartphone, like think about old dial phones, they have SMS available. You don't even need an app for that. And all of these channels come with different features, with different advantages, so you can really address a variety of expectations users have nowadays. So when I talk about, excuse me, by the way, it's, I don't know, Dan, what you did now to me, but now I have it.
I started that. I'll take it as battery.
So just to give you some examples on how your customers or users in general can find out about messaging options, and there are plenty out there. So just some examples here. So the first image on the left, that's Apple Business Chat Suggest, and that's a really great example of a smart way to deflect calls as well, not just to find messaging, but also to deflect calls. So the way it works is that when a user taps on the phone number within the iOS system, either it's like you see on the image shown on the website, or it's somewhere within the iOS system, when they tap on that phone number, an option pops up that gives the customer the choice to either message or call in. And that's, I mean, it sounds simple, but that's really that brilliant thing about I'm putting it into the customer's hand. It's their choice. Whatever is the most convenient for them right now, they can either call me or message me as an organization. And that's really what people want nowadays, right? The customer to be treated in their preferred manner. But even beyond that, it's so embedded in the ecosystem of mobile phones nowadays that you can find messaging buttons within the phone system search. Like if you look at the assistants, they can pop up messaging options. It's part of the Maps application that you now have the option to message or to call, and it's kind of embedded everywhere. So it's really easier than ever to find those messaging options for a user. And then of course, also in branded environments, if you think about your app, you can add a button there, but also if you think about your website, you can, yes, add a web chat button there, but also a button for a messaging channel if you use one, if it makes sense. So if we talk about the different messaging channels now, just to explain what the different values are and what different messaging channels might be used for, I want to start with SMS in this case. I think everybody knows what SMS is. If you don't know, I really would like to know where you've lived the last years, because everybody has it. It's out there for, I think it just had its 25-year anniversary, like last year or the year before. Every phone has it, right? I said it earlier, no matter how smart the phone is, you have it. And it's also a great app, again, for call deflection. So for those situations where someone might have already called into your IVR, you can then figure out, okay, what are they calling about? And maybe does it make sense to move them to a digital channel instead? Because the use case might be just better in a digital channel. The only caution that I would point out here is know if the person has been on a website or in a messaging channel before and didn't get the answer they were looking for and called in because of that. Because if you then want to move them back, right, that's a bad customer experience. But in general, if your agents are busy and you just want to let your customer know, like, hey, you can wait here for 15 minutes for the or I could send you an SMS and then we have a conversation right there immediately. So it just gives them, again, the option to do that. And we actually had a customer who used it and they saw an 11% call deflection within the first weeks by offering this. So it's really great. And then in addition to that, SMS is known to be very successful in regards to open rate and response rate, much better than email. So people look at their SMS, right? They get the notifications and they react to those. Next up is the branded app. And if you have an app, if your customers are using your app for whatever you're offering it, well, then messaging just makes sense in there, either as part of the menu that you offer a messaging option or that you have some sort of a floating button as part of your app. And it's kind of, it feels like a no-brainer. If you have an app, again, if your customers are using it, that's why not? Because they might have questions throughout the usage of the app about whatever they're looking at right now. So it's really easy to enable them to contact you. Plus, since it's your environment, things like authentication, encryption, security in general is no issue there. And just to give you an example from one of our customers, that's an insurance company. They're using it for their auto insurance, and they added messaging to the app. They already are using chat on the website, on the desktop and mobile website version. And they've seen a much higher CSAT and NPS score for the app based on the usage. I mean, not that the mobile website was particularly bad from a CSAT or NPS perspective, but they've seen an even higher value within the mobile apps. And now their customers can ask questions immediately, really, while they're filing claims or while they're updating information. It makes it just so much more convenient. And I mean, obviously, those numbers reflect that convenience, which is great.
Yeah, and Josephine, just to make this conversation a little bit, you know, when you use the verb can, you know, that the customers can do this, we've been seeing that they do this, and that you know, the people are more agile, you know, incorporating the different modes, you know, within a conversation. So, you know, if it makes sense to get the alert, you know, outbound from the insurance company in the form of, you know, either an SMS or a message within the app or that sort of thing, that's fine. You know, it's a trigger and it's sort of expected, and we're all sort of used to it, and we, you know, give permissions to do that sort of stuff. So it's become more and more organic, and people are becoming more agile in how they incorporate, you know, messaging if it's appropriate.
Yeah.
And you know, we're just seeing comfort in that.
Yeah, and it's this expectation now too, right? You're talking about notifications.
Yeah.
So for a long time, notifications have been this one-way street. You send something, no matter if it's an app notification or an SMS notification, you send something and then, I don't know, you have to go on a website or you have to call in, worst case scenario. You have now this convenience now that you can just continue, right? And people are starting to understand that they can do that, and they're expecting this now too. So it's really an interesting time right now for that. Awesome. So next up is Facebook Messenger, the next channel that I want to talk about. And I know this is the most popular messaging app in Australia, so it's obviously a very important one. And if you have a Facebook page already, adding Facebook Messenger as an addition for more private or sensitive interactions, just seems to make sense, right? And we're seeing that a lot of brands are already doing this as well. The great thing about Facebook Messenger is it comes with amazing features. So you can not only send text messages back and forth, but you have, for example, the carousels that you can see on the image on the right-hand side. So you can kind of create an interactive conversation by offering answer options for the customer that they can either select. You can still have the option for open-ended text, but it just helps to steer the conversation a little bit, right? Not keep it too open-ended, but help them figure out what they want and then present them with a solution. So to give you the example of Jetstar, an airline that is using Facebook Messenger for customer care, they have the same chatbot deployed on their website, and both versions, like the website chatbot and the Facebook Messenger chatbot, share the same knowledge. They share the same information. It's just adjusted for the particular channel, right? I mean, Facebook Messenger, you have less real estate, you have more interactive features, so it's adjusted towards it. But again, it's the same base underneath. And their VA success rate has been high from day one, which is, yes, based on that they had it on the web before, but also because they just knew what their customers were asking for in the Facebook Messenger channel. And they can now, in checking in on information on their flight, they can change information. And it's really helpful when it comes to reacting really fast, no matter what situation you're in. So to give you an example, last year they had a situation where all of a sudden thousands of their customers were reaching out to check in on their canceled flights. And this application really helped to reduce the response time in that peak situation time from hours to under a minute. And that's so important for the brand, for the customer, for everything that relates to customer engagement. And that was just great to see how this Facebook Messenger chatbot really helped in that regards, right?
And I think that pointed out another best practice that we're seeing, and you brought it up, but I don't think you emphasized it enough, that there are applications or standard things. You're an airline, that there's booking, there's checking on, you land late, you want to see what the status of the next flight, all these sorts of things that had been worked out for one of the, for something that pops up for an agent or that an IVR can answer. And what a lot of companies were discovering is they'd have to write them over again to be rendered in the latest messaging platform. But the best practice is as you pointed out, make sure you have the same information happening regardless of how the the customer, the passenger is going to use it. And it sounds like that's what Jetstar did here. Is same thing regardless.
Yeah, and that's important, not just between messaging and web channels, right? But even if you think about the phone channel, it's the same thing. No matter where you are, the information should be the same that are presented. Just adjust it to the channel that you're in.
Exactly.
And talking about Facebook Messenger, just because I like the flexibility of the platform, right? This is a customer service scenario, but I want to give you a marketing scenario where this insurance used Facebook Messenger for marketing campaigns. So to really create an interactive and more differentiated marketing campaign. And they created the cutest thing ever. Wow. Arlo the koala bear. And you can have a conversation with Arlo through Facebook Messenger. You can hug him, you can boop him on the nose. And people love it. Like from day one, the sentiment that came back from the users of this koala bear was very positive. They loved it, and they see Arlo as a person, not as a chatbot or something artificial, which is actually really interesting. And also, so the purpose of Arlo is to help increase awareness of environmental issues, help plant a tree, essentially. And they have created a lot of awareness. People are spreading and sharing this on their own social media. There was lots of media coverage around this koala bear. Just because it was created in just such a fun, entertaining way that it really helped with the cause in general. And then during the fires last year, the majority of people that reached out were asking for how can we help, how can we donate, how can we just in general engage in those difficult times and be there for you. And this is just a great way of seeing how people come together using those messaging platforms if you create a great experience like that. And then we started on Dan's slide earlier with what are the most important messaging channels. So for Australia, Facebook Messenger is number 1. Number 2 is WhatsApp. And WhatsApp is interesting. So if you look at Facebook Messenger, very interactive. You can do a lot of stuff with menus and carousels and all that stuff. That's not the goal of WhatsApp. So yes, you can send images, you can send documents, but for WhatsApp, the important is to be lightweight, enable longevity and reliability, and make sure to keep the data and security topics in mind. So they are really focused on the user itself to keep the conversation safe, etc. But since it is such a well-used app, it is still an important channel that people should use. And even some countries, so if you think about like low data usage, low battery usage, so it's good for whatever phone you have out there. And some countries even whitelisted the messages going back and forth, so it is not using data from their data plan, from their provider. So that's how far WhatsApp really reaches that telcos change the way they price those channels for their customers, which is really interesting, I find.
Well, and it muddies the line between messaging and commerce. This whole notion of task completion and accelerating people towards their own goals. That's one of the things they found where WhatsApp is very popular. You fire up your phone, you open WhatsApp. It's not using your data, but they're more receptive. The users are more receptive to receiving messages, to carrying out commerce, to making payments. it's fascinating. It's
Yeah.
addictive.
Yeah. And then there's one more, Apple Business Chat. So you heard from Fiona that I've worked for an Apple reseller in Germany. I still have an iPhone. I still have an Apple computer. Well, I'm not on an Apple computer right now. For work, I use Windows, but I love my Apple. And if you used Apple before, if you're a fan of Apple yourself, you already know what the value of it is. Because the great thing about Apple is that everything is integrated, right? Everything works together seamlessly. And that's how they treat their messaging as well. So Apple Messages, which is what where Apple Business Chat is integrated in, is part of the entire iOS ecosystem. So you can utilize the built-in authentication, you can utilize Apple Pay, and all of those things as part of your messaging platform. And you as an organization through Apple Business Chat have access to all of those things. So you make it so much easier for your customers to embark in conversational commerce, to use Dan's words, to engage with you for any issue that they might have. And then I already talked about Apple Business Chat Suggest, but in addition to that, it's so tightly integrated into iOS that, again, you can find messaging buttons in Siri search, on Apple Maps, and just plain everywhere, which makes it such an interactive experience. And then one of the things, so while it doesn't allow you to send proactive notifications, Apple blocks that, but it has an integration into Apple Calendar. So you could send out a calendar invite that then is used as a notification. So there are just really great ways on how you can utilize that Apple ecosystem to create that great customer engagement. And we see that also with one of our telco clients who added Apple Business Chat. So first of all, their customers are saying, like, yep, I would use that again anytime. You see close to 94%. That's a huge number of people using it. And they're so successful that about a fifth of their digital interactions are now going through Apple Business Chat. That's how much people like it. Customer satisfaction scores are always high with Apple Business Chat, which is exciting. And they are using it for sales and service. So that's actually an interesting point when you think about messaging, because on a call, you have your IVR up front, right? You ask for, hey, what are you calling about? Or press 1 for whatnot. Even on a website, you know on which page the person is, and you can use that information to route someone to the right agent. In messaging, you don't really have that. So they are using a chatbot up front to understand the intent, asking like, okay, great, we want to help you. What question do you have? Like, how can we help you? What is it exactly that you need an answer for? And then it understands the intent and uses this information to route to the right agent. So you avoid the whole situation of, I route to one agent, ask what it is about, then you route to the next agent. Oh, that was not the right one. And then you route to the next agent, right? It just minimizes that, that effort really greatly. So, and yeah, again, because this telco is using the entire platform, Dan and I talked about it earlier, right? They're using it for web, both desktop and mobile web, for their app, for SMS, and now Apple Business Chat. So it's really great to see that this channel gets so much traction in their customer base.
Yeah, and it's a fascinating story, because in a way, Apple's its own worst enemy because it is so well integrated, and you just think you're using your phone, not the Apple Business Chat per se. It's a quiet success. As a third-party analyst, you know, we know that a lot of companies are working with it. We see, you know, this is one of the few success stories I've ever seen, because you know, people don't tout it. It's something they offer to their Apple people, you know, their customers that they know are using Apple. So
Yeah.
it's good to see here.
Well, and it's kind of a catch-22 with Apple, right? It's so new that not a lot of customers and consumers know about it, that they could use it. So that organizations kind of sit there and it's like, oh, should I do it? I haven't seen much about it, as you just said, right? I haven't seen much success about it. But if one doesn't start, the other will never follow. It's kind of
exactly
at the moment. But that's why Apple is so great with, they're coming up with ideas on how can we help these organizations be more successful with it. That's why Apple Business Chat Suggest is just such a great enhancement to Apple Business Chat, because it really helps with that discoverability aspect. And I think they're doing a good job in just figuring out how can we make messaging more relevant for today's customer engagement, and how can we help organizations utilize those efficiencies that messaging just comes with in those messaging channels. So it's a great way, and I think they're leading the way in regards on how we are going to engage with messaging going forward.
I'll keep my eyes open.
Yeah. Talking about operational efficiencies, because that's really the big thing for messaging channels. By the way, I know we talk a lot about messaging channels. Just one thing that I want to throw in the middle, kind of, we are not saying that messaging is going to be everything going forward, right? People still need to call in their use cases where the phone is just important. There are use cases where video chats are important. Messaging is just a new way of engaging with customers, right? It's the big picture that counts at the end of the day, and that is important for all of us. But since messaging comes with new challenges and does things differently, it's interesting to look at kind of how to handle those engagements there. Alrighty, so we talked about, or Dan mentioned the word asynchronous earlier today. So what that means in a messaging channel is, if you think about how you send or receive messages, right? Sometimes you sit there and send something back and forth because you're in a very active conversation right now, so you're going back and forth very fast. And sometimes you see the notification, you're like, nope, I do not want to deal with it right now. Or it's my colleague again who sends a stupid joke again. I just don't care about it right now. So you're just ignoring it, right? That's what asynchronous is about. Messaging is just by nature, it allows everyone to have immediate back and forth, but also to pause at any time without ever losing the context. So that makes it's great for friend, family, etc. conversation, but that makes it interesting from a business to consumer perspective. So, because if you think about it, if you are a customer and you take your phone, you send a message to a brand, you have an issue right now, you want an answer right now. That's kind of the expectation there. But theoretically, messaging allows you to put your phone down, allows the company to come back at one point. So that's why I thought I'd share a little bit about what we are seeing across all of our clients that use messaging channels. So we looked at all of our global messaging deployments and share with you what we see, how customers behave. So first of all, 75% of all the messaging engagements that we are seeing between our customers and their clients happen within one engagement. What that means is an engagement for Nuance is an immediate back and forth till the issue is resolved and you end. Like the customer just doesn't send a message anymore and the agent says, okay, this issue is resolved, and closes out the conversation in their agent desktop. 75% of all the conversations that we see in messaging channels end within one of those immediate back and forths. Overall, like the average engagements per conversation are 1.3. Again, engagement at Nuance is that immediate back and forth. A conversation at Nuance is a variety of number of engagements. So if the customer comes back at a later time, maybe an hour later, to follow up on the original request, that's a second engagement, but it's still the same conversation, plus any pauses maybe in between. So we see that across all of those conversations, we see 1.3 engagements per conversation, meaning, again, the majority of interactions that our customers have with their customers are immediate in nature. And of those customers who come back at a later time, they do so within an hour. So so those who pause don't pause for days or for hours. They really come back within an hour, the majority of them. So that shows you, again, when the user has their phone in their hand, they likely really want that issue resolved immediately. And I always try to think about it, or when I first saw that data, I thought about when I was a teenage girl and I had a crush on someone, I was staring at my phone, hypnotizing it for that person to call. Nowadays, I'm staring at my phone, hypnotizing it for those 3 dots to start jumping for me to see that the agent is finally answering. So that's kind of the way you have to think about it. They're staring at their phone, they're hypnotizing it and hoping that the agent comes back immediately. Because I mean, at the end of the day, no one wakes up and says like, yay, I have an issue with something. Let me send a message and then wait 24 hours till I get an answer back. That's not how this works. So asynchronous is important, but it's also important to interact with your customer really in a real time thinking, send them an answer back immediately, engage with them immediately and help them to get their issue resolved immediately. Leave it, again, I said it earlier, leave it on the customer, right? It's customer, if they want to pause it or if they have to because the child comes in running into the office, is like, I want attention right now, then let them deal with the kid and you can continue the conversation at a later time, but keep it from a customer perspective. Because what we see, if that's not happening, right, you're artificially prolonging that entire conversation. Just to give you an idea of what that would look like. So a customer sends a message, they hold their phone maybe for 15, maybe 20 seconds if it's a patient customer. And at one point they just give up and put the phone down and do something else. Maybe they clean their house, whatever, go in a meeting. The agent comes back and sends a message. Finally, the agent has the message, right? They see, okay, you have a question about this, sends an answer back, sends a message back. So then the agent sits there, waits maybe, I don't know, 30 seconds. And if the customer comes back, closes out the conversation in their agent desktop. An hour later, the customer finally sees the engagement. It's like, oh yeah, okay, and sends an answer back. And then the same thing happens with the agent. The agent doesn't react immediately, and so on and so on. So you're artificially prolonging that entire engagement. And as a customer, I mean, we are all customers. Does anyone like this? I don't think so. I answer immediately. So that's kind of the important part about when you think about messaging or think about asynchronous, right? It's the customer-driven aspect here.
Yeah. And a little inside baseball, if you will. We have enough experience with messaging platforms and the messaging paradigm. SMS, like you said, 20 whatever years old. But even on with the more recent sort of social platforms that are text-based, that as a third-party analyst, we watch the adoption. We watch some of the contact center administrators say, oh great, we can have blended agents, or we can have agents that are handling 5 calls at a time as opposed to 1. and they did the math, and part of the ROI for bringing messaging into the contact center was, oh, you can handle more conversations at once, which this looks like it could be code for. And you brought up sort of the pitfalls of being asynchronous when the expectation is for immediacy. So one of the things, as you think of best practices, we've learned, don't have agents involved in more than 3 chats at a time. We've learned that you want to apply artificial intelligence or some kind of predictive analytics, machine learning to match customers to the right agent. That applies just as much in messaging channels as in voice channels, and also to be predictive, to help move toward, when that re-engagement takes place at the customer's behest, you want to be quick to react. You don't want the brand to be the entity introducing latencies into the conversation. So don't mistake asynchronous with high latency. When that moment happens, use the resources to respond quickly. And that's what you said, essentially.
Yeah. And I thanks for bringing up, by the way, concurrency, that you can have multiple conversations at the same time. You can have that with chat on a website already, right? And that's actually the interesting part, because I know I've heard that too with asynchronous. You can have, I don't know, hundreds of concurrent conversations. I'm exaggerating right now. But it's difficult, right? If the agent is not answering immediately. But an interesting part, and that's a great lead to the last point that I want to make for today, is what we are seeing is that asynchronous conversations last longer, right? It's texting on a mobile phone takes longer than typing on a keyboard, I assume. Customers are just a little bit slower in responding. So that's what really helps with the concurrency at the end of the day. So we're seeing, again, across all of our messaging deployment, that on average, the customer response time is 40% longer than on a website for a web chat. And what that means is, so if you have that 3, or we're seeing an average of 2.3 concurrent engagements for a web chat, that means you can have those 40%, 40% higher concurrency for messaging. The importance, though, is that the platform itself has to be interactive and seamless in the way of handling, like, okay, this customer is in an inactive state right now, but the issue is not resolved, so I'm moving it into the background. So there's a next customer coming in, I'm moving that into the foreground. But the moment the customer who's in the background right now on the platform, the moment they answer, they go back to the same agent and the agent can continue, right? So it is a very flexible way now of handling all of those incoming engagements, because the brand has no control over it anymore, really. It's, again, it's in the customer's control, and the platform has to figure out how to handle now these incoming engagements that are just different than on a website and way different than on a call center. So the efficiency that asynchronous and with that messaging channels come with is really that seamless customer experience, right? You can reconnect, you always have the history of the conversation. It's on the customer's terms. You can promote agent efficiency by routing back to the same agent, especially if it's the same conversation, right? You want to route it back to the same agent so they can continue. They need to see the history, especially when it was in an inactive state, or if the customer comes back maybe a day later, they need to know what they talked with them about it before. And just more flexibility in regards to less wasted time. Higher concurrency, right? That 40% more for active engagements, and that you have, again, the whole context available. And then in addition to that, which I haven't talked about before, is agents can pause too. We recommend not to do it at any given time, but sometimes agents just have to follow up on something. They have to check with their supervisor. So now they have the ability to not let the customer hang for 30 minutes on an on-hold line, but to just say, like, okay, give me 30 minutes, I'll connect with you in a little bit. I'll just have to check on that. So those are the overall efficiency values. And then just to summarize real quickly, right? Messaging is not just, oh, a new channel. It's a nice ecosystem of functionalities that help create those compelling customer conversations throughout all of those different channels, combining this immediate back and forth with real time and the asynchronous capabilities, using chatbots or virtual assistants together with human agents, with live agents in a seamless manner, sending out proactive notifications and being able to engage right within the same channel. At Nuance, you can even use biometrics technologies, like using your voice to authenticate yourself inside the app. You can use speech recognition technologies to speech enable your app if that's something you want to do. And then the ability to move seamlessly between channels if you want to move a caller to SMS, for example, doing that in a seamless manner across all the channels in general. And since you can combine both, right, I talked about chatbots and live agent, our model really helps you to address both of those without any extra charges. So what I mean with that, because we are delivering chatbots and live agents together, so no matter how many use cases you handle with your chatbot, if you use agents to help your chatbot, just in case they're not quite sure what the right answer is, that's what the Nina Coach functionality is. Or if you have to escalate to a live agent, because it's all one blended model, you're not charged anything extra, which is what we see if you use 2 vendors, or even sometimes some other vendors. If the chatbot doesn't know the right answer, especially if you use 2 vendors, they don't play well with each other, maybe they don't know what's going on between the 2, and you handle it over to a live agent, you might get some extra costs here, and you have to pay twice for the same engagement, which is obviously not efficient for you as an organization either, right? So with that, I think we have a couple of minutes left for question and answers. So Fiona, I'm handing it back to you. If there are any questions, that we have some time to answer those.
There certainly are, Josephine, and thank you so much. So Ambika has asked a question, and you talked about three different verticals, insurance, utilities, travel and hospitality, where this is currently operating. And I love that you used Australian examples. But the question is, are you currently working in a not-for-profit or a non-government organisation, especially in the human services that would be dealing with relationship issues?
Now I would like to understand what relationship issues means. There are so many things that pop into my head right now, but just to keep it broader. So in general, we can work with any vertical, right? Those are just some examples. So across our customer base, we have travel, we have utilities, government, telcos, insurances, banking, and on and on and on. So not-for-profit is not a problem. What I would recommend is to reach out if there's a specific question, since I think it depends on the particular use case. The non-for-profit, reach out to our service team, and I have an email on the next slide. Actually, let me open that up under cxexperts@nuance.com, and then we can discuss what the exact use case is, but I wouldn't see why not.
Yeah, I think it's a highly sensitive area, just knowing where this person works. Anyway, so thank you for that. It's like know your customer.
Yeah, but you know, just abstract on a global level, you know, as we've been looking at the growth of, and it really came out of automated handling of, you know, sensitive topics, that there were areas where the combination of messaging and an automated system, you know, for handling personal questions, and some, two instances pop into my head. One, and you know, one had to do with the introduction of personal healthcare stuff in India, was handled through an automated platform. And then any debt collection, we learned that somehow incorporating an outbound automated notice, as intrusive as it sounds, in some ways it was preferable to having a live person call on the phone and you know, exact some promise to pay from an individual. So I know that's orthogonal to what you were talking about, but you know, it is in highly sensitive or personal areas that some people just prefer, you know, dealing in text, sometimes preferably with a virtual assistant, and that's human nature.
Yeah, I think the preference for text, just to add on to that. So I actually had a situation at one point, I don't know if you can hear that, but I mean, you said it earlier, right? I'm German, but I live in the US right now. So I'm living here for 6 years about now. And sometimes I have difficulties understanding people. It's just because I didn't grow up here, right? And I prefer text just because of that, especially if I deal with a brand. I much rather send them a quick text message. It makes me feel more comfortable. I don't need to figure out, especially if they Southern accent. Whoa, I have a hard time understanding them sometimes. Nothing against those people, they're awesome. But it's, you know, it's sometimes you just have difficulties with, just because you're not from the same country, etc. And texting is much easier. And Dan, I agree with you. Sometimes there are just situations that it's just hard to talk about. Maybe it's easier to just quickly write it and then send it, versus sitting there and trying to get the courage to say it out loud. You know, I can totally see that it makes a whole lot of sense. And then the same with chatbot versus live agent. Some people, and debt collection was actually a great example, Dan, they're just embarrassed about something. So it's easier for them to talk to a chatbot or to text with a chatbot than to text with a live agent about that situation, right? So, yeah.
Cool. So Brianna has a question. It's probably going to be the last question we get the time to ask today, because you've been so thorough. She wants to know, seeing customer interactions directed to live agents being reduced via the use of a chatbot is very exciting. With that said, what kind of customer satisfaction outcomes have you seen with organisations using chatbots?
Great question. Very important one. Yes, you're absolutely right that live agent escalations are being reduced with chatbots because the idea is, right, they can reduce or they can take over the easy questions, the most recent, most asked questions, FAQs, and all those kind of things. So we see high, very high CSATs, 80+%, 90+% if there is an escalation strategy still in place. So the important part is that you understand which use cases make the most sense to automate. Not all of them make sense. And then have an escalation strategy to a live agent in place, because it's technology. Sometimes it just doesn't work. There's nothing anyone can do about it, no matter how greatly you design it. Or there's a new situation, or there's a very emotional situation. We just talked about that. Sometimes it's just better to escalate it. And as long as that is available, and as long as that is seamless, and it's not like, oh, you have to switch a channel and you have to repeat everything, yada, yada, yada. Yes, we see very high CSAT scores in that combination.
And I would only add, it's very use case driven.
Yes.
And it's always compared to what. So if there are applications that are low CSAT, almost by definition, we've seen a conversion to automated handling in a chatbot either go down initially because people's expectation is a vast majority are still expecting to resolve an issue by talking to an agent. This is human nature right now. So I should have said it's use case and age related, unfortunately, because there's a new generation that kind of regard their interacting with customer care or with brands over messaging platforms almost like a game. And if you can orchestrate the interaction to culminate in satisfactory resolution of the issue, you improve CSAT. If it's the wrong instance and you're fitting a square peg in a round hole, it's not going to work. So use case driven, be conscious of who the clientele is, and you can manage that number, and you'll see a great improvement in CSAT.
Well, thank you, Josephine and Dan. We are at time, and there are quite a number of other questions that have come in, so I'm sure you'll be able to respond after the webinar, which is terrific. Thank you both for your time on the East and West Coast of the US, and thank you, Nuance, for enabling us to share this information about messaging being the new paradigm. With that, Dan and Josephine, any closing comments from you?
Well, thank you so much for inviting us, Fiona. Thanks so much for being there on the webinar. Again, we really appreciate it that you joined us. And then again, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're here to help.
Right. Josephine took my line. Thank you, Fiona. Very nice to meet you.
Oh, you two are a problem. You share a cough and you're on separate coasts of the US. But thank you to everybody that joined us today, especially given the circumstances with coronavirus and this era of ambiguity and uncertainty. We're really appreciative of you taking the time to share your time with us, and we'll speak to you next time. Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.